What's that?
Go ahead.
If we account for ourselves as Americans, as economic capitalists, perhaps the second way we look at ourselves is as people who get to religious... Stop. Are you able to practice whatever religious belief you want without any hindrance? Is there any constraint? Is there anything that stops you from believing and practicing the religion that you believe in? Ponder that. Ponder what stops you from thinking and acting as you want to with your most fundamental beliefs. Now, we can account for, and will account for in class, those constraints that are there. But the one constraint, especially in regards to state action, there is none in America. You are not constrained in the United States of America. As enshrined in the First Amendment to our Constitution, the first thing we did to restrain government power was to say that the government shall not set up religion, shall not establish religion, and the government shall not stop you from the free exercise of your religious beliefs. That hallmark of American society, that fundamental principle, had to have gotten there somehow. The question thus, the issue you as a historian have to be able to understand is, how was it that we got to religious freedom? And so that issue can be posed to how to religious freedom, and we have 150 years roughly of history to cover very quickly in order to understand that. Now we go back and we start. The question actually doesn't start in America, it starts with what's called the Protestant Reformation. You learned about it last year in world history, one of the most fundamentally important events in Europe, perhaps the world. The Protestant Reformation came from the Catholic Church. By the 1500s, the Catholic Church had excesses. It was an empire, it needed money, and it could get money through a variety of ways. The most important of those was called the sale of indulgences. You wanted to go to heaven, the most important thing in your life was going to heaven. How could you get there? The Catholic Church could sell you an indulgence, and that indulgence would get you out of purgatory into heaven. You could count off hundreds of thousands of years of your time in purgatory. And the Pope at the time in the early 1500s, in order to build the splendors of the Renaissance at the Vatican, had to hire a guy named Jonathan Tetzel. Jonathan Tetzel went selling those indulgences. There he is, selling brilliantly across what we now know as Germany, these get-out-of-hell cards to get yourself to heaven. There was one individual who did not like that. That individual was an extraordinarily pious and important preacher in what was then called the Holy Roman Empire, what we now call Germany. His name was Martin Luther. He's a Catholic monk. He was extraordinarily concerned with salvation. How do I get to heaven? In fact, he came up with the concept was that I don't get to heaven. I can't buy my way there. I can't get my way there. The only way I get there is through the grace of God. God will reach down and bring me up if I'm pious, if I'm holy, if I'm good. There's no act that I can do. It is in fact the salvation of me by God that will make the difference. Thus, when he saw Jonathan Tetzel, when he saw the sale of indulgences, he went bonkers. My parishioners are going to hell. My people are going to hell. This is morally wrong. And he tacked what was known as the 95 Theses. So far we have sale of indulgences. We have Martin Luther. We have the 95 Theses. And those 95 Theses are his statement attacking the Catholic Church and the Pope himself, saying morally wrong, we cannot do this. He was excommunicated, of course, at the Diet of Worms. He was brought before the Holy Roman Empire. The emperor himself was there, and he refused to recant, refused to take back his words. Fortunately for Protestants around the world, he was saved by one of the major dukes in the land in the Holy Roman Empire, and he was allowed to put forward what we now know as Lutheranism, after his own name. Lutheranism was the first of the Protestant religions. Why Protestant? A protest against the Catholic Church and its excesses, and that Protestantism came out of Martin Luther, one man standing up to the most powerful institution in the world at the time. 3 fundamental precepts you need to know about what Martin Luther said, about what the Lutheran faith says, and what Protestantism is at its heart. 1, salvation by God's grace alone. You can't work your way into heaven. You can't do the Catholic penance. You can't do the Catholic work to get to heaven. God gets you there because you're pious and holy. Number 2, the Bible is the only authority. You cannot look to the church. You cannot look to the priest. You cannot look to the practices. The only authority for how you get to heaven, how to be pious, how to be religious, is the Bible itself. And then number 3, we don't have a structure to our religion. We have a priesthood of all believers. Thus, we have a Lutheran faith set up by Martin Luther that was there and powerful. And what happens in Europe over the next 50 years is let's kill each other about what to believe and what's going to be powerful. So the Protestant Reformation was an amazing event in the 1500s in Europe. 1517, remember it.